Well, hello, Stacey Murphy here. It's a breezy day out in my garden, but I thought I would shoot a quick video about trellising. And here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's the start of the growing season for a lot of people, and people are wondering how to keep crops up off the ground for many reasons. One is that you want things to grow vertically so that you can use the space underneath to grow a second crop, or they're just heavy crops that you want to get up off the ground. Things like tomatoes, things like cucumbers, peas and beans, and then even things like squash gourds. I love growing tromboncino squash, and I like to get it up on a trellis and get it up off the ground so that I have more space in order to grow food underneath it. So I get a lot of questions, what's the best way to trellis? Now, there are hundreds of ways to trellis, maybe thousands, and it all comes down to whatever resources are available to you. But I wanted to share with you how I trellis and why I trellis the way I do, and I apologize for all of the wind. I hope you can still hear me. So the reason I trellis the way that I do is I like to maximize my production with minimum work. And one of the ways that I do that is to use the same crop plan year after year. And what that means is that I have the same size spaces, a couple of them, and basically every year I rotate through each one of those beds so that I'm growing different crops in different beds each year in order to prevent from getting diseases in the soil. So I'm doing this as a long-term fertility plan, right? And so what I like to do is to have separate boxes, and for each one of them to have its own trellis, and for each one of those boxes to have a very similar setup so that when I do that crop plan, each year I just move from one box to the next and I just rotate through. Now you might be thinking, doesn't that get a little boring growing the same thing every year? No, it doesn't, because it's so much easier to not have to think about it and just do the same thing again next year. That's number one reason. Number two is, do you know how many varieties there are of tomatoes and eggplant and peppers and cucumbers? So you can grow a different variety each year and it can be a totally different experience. And then, so that's one way that I make sure that even though I'm using the same crop plan, that I'm getting a lot of variety year to year. But then also, each year I have some experimental space, and this is space where I'm just leaving it open and available to try different things. So I leave about 10% where I try new things. So those are the ways in which I make my life easy by using the same crop plan and rotate through, but then I also get to challenge myself by growing new things, and I get to, experience new palette by choosing new varieties each year. So that's why I do that. So then that means that my trellis becomes really easy. So all I want to do for my trellis is I want to create a line across each one of my boxes that from one end to the other, I just have two uprights, and then I can trellis any way I like in between that. And I'll show you my two favorites here. So this bed here, you can kind of see the end of it. This is my tomato trellis, and this is what's called a Florida weave. So essentially I have two posts at the very end of the box, and they're basically screwed right into the wooden boxes because I have boxes here. If I don't have boxes, I make a little teepee and I make sure I get it really pushed into the ground really strongly so that my tomatoes don't pull the trellis over. But essentially you need two posts at the end, and then each one of the tomatoes, I oftentimes like to stake each individual tomato just to hold it up a little bit extra. And then I take string, and you can see every 6 inches, I take and I weave back and forth through the tomatoes and then weave back, so that what it does is it holds them in a line. So look at this. If you look in this line of tomatoes, the plants are like this. Now, that helps to keep them upright, number one, but it also means that I can grow things underneath because now sunlight can come in from both sides. So I've got lots of herbs growing on this side. I actually have my eggplant on this side because I didn't have anywhere else to put it, along with more herbs. So that's my tomato trellis. And then the other type of trellis that I like to use is what's called hortinet, and basically horticulture netting. And it's a plastic netting, and you can see it here on this one on this side. I like to use it for things like cucumber, peas, beans, squash gourds that like to grow vertically. And basically what I do is I have the two posts, and then the netting is there. The squares are about this big, and so the peas and the beans, they vine up. This one over here, I'm actually vining up Malabar spinach right now. It's about to get really hot here, and so that's something that's going to tolerate the heat really well. So I've got Malabar spinach that's going to vine up this side, and then back Back in this corner, you can't see it, but behind my tomato trellis is my cucumber trellis. And those are smaller than my tomatoes right now because they got in the ground a little bit late. So with this horticulture netting, what's really great is basically you can just attach it to the bottom and to the top and maybe at the middle points. And I like to use something like a zip tie. That's something that's really fast and easy. You could use whatever makes sense for you. And you're just making sure that it's tied tightly to those posts. Right now I haven't affixed this yet. This is just hanging on some nails at the top and at the bottom. It's not attached, which is why it's kind of drooping. And right now that Malabar is small, so it's okay. But I need to affix it so that the Malabar spinach doesn't pull it down. And the netting is really great because at the end of the season, what I can do with it is I take it down and I just, with all the vines still on it, I just cut the vines at the bottom where the plants are. I lay the netting somewhere hot and sunny, and then basically the sun browns up, wilts all the plants, as long as they don't have any diseases, browns them all up. And then basically I just take the netting and I go over to the compost bin and I kind of like do this and it crumbles right into the compost bin. Again, that's if it's disease-free. So then I can just have my netting ready for the next year. And the netting comes in rolls, and you can get it. I got this one, it's 6.5 feet tall. Mine is, by 30 feet, so I could do several of these beds with it. And then I can just reuse it year to year, which is great. And then for my tomato trellis, I use sometimes 2 different types of twine. Sometimes I pick a more natural fiber twine, which is what this one is. Sometimes I pick a polypropylene twine, which does a little bit less damage if you're pulling on it really tightly with the tomato plants, as you're pulling them upright and getting them in between those twines. Sometimes that can rub on the tomato plant a little bit. So sometimes the polypropylene is a little bit better for that, but either works. So that's a little bit about my trellis. It's fairly simple. I didn't want to give exact directions for how I build it. I wanted to share more my philosophy around it because it's really a simple solution as long as you have a way to do 2 uprights, and then you can just fill in whatever type of trellis makes the most sense for you. And what's great about the HortiNet as well is that it can be used horizontally if you're growing a lot of flowers and you want those flower stems to be nice and vertical. You can attach that HortiNet to some stakes, pull it taut, and it will hold up those stalks and make sure that the flowers stand upright. All right, so those are some simple ideas for why I trellis the way I do and how it integrates with my crop plan. Thanks so much for tuning in, and if you want to share some comments below, please post your comments. I love hearing from you. All right, see you in the next video.